You're listening to the Epic All Day podcast with Jim Simcoe. I'm here to help you make your life epic, so let's get rolling with the show. Hey everybody, welcome to the Epic All Day podcast. Glad to have you guys with us today. We have a really special guest. Today we have Jeff Robbins, former Rockstar, current tech CEO. So welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you're like officially the very first and probably the only rockstar, the actual legitimate rock star that I will ever have on this podcast. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, don't sell yourself short, Jim.
I guess maybe
you could certainly have bigger rock stars on than me.
I don't know about that. So you're the lead singer of the band Orbit, right? From back in the day?
Yep.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about that experience? Because that just sounds awesome.
Well, man. Yeah. I gotta go back in my memory. Let's see. So in the early 90s, I was kind of kicking around the Boston music scene, trying to get things together. And there was sort of this plate tectonic shift in the music scene when Nirvana kind of broke through, and all the music that had been called college rock before that, kind of became much more mainstream. And all of a sudden, all the stuff that I was enjoying kind of had some commercial viability to it. And Boston had a very vibrant music scene going on, and I started a new band, and I don't know, it just kind of things lined up. And basically within about 6 months of forming the new band, we were in a record label bidding war, and we got to meet a whole lot of people from a whole lot of record labels and go to New York and LA and all sorts of places to talk to them. And we ended up signing with A&M Records in 1994. And I basically spent the rest of the 90s in a van, touring around the US and Canada and a little bit in Europe, but a lot of that. And we did the Lalapalooza tour in 1997.
Oh my God. What was that like?
It was fun. We had a song that, kind of got into the modern rock top 10 for, I don't know, a few weeks. And that
was Medicine, right? Was it Medicine?
Yep. Yeah. And so we got to we got invited on the Lalapalooza tour. But we weren't, I don't know, we had a sort of very blue collar work ethic about what we were doing. And, it was the Lalapalooza tour. So like we could get a tour bus and we could do that. But there was a Jerry Seinfeld episode back in the early 90s as well, about flying first class. And once you've flown first class, you can't ever go back to coach.
Right.
And we felt like, if we got that tour bus, we're never going to want to go back to the van. And it's really expensive to tour in a tour bus. So we'll just do the Lollapalooza tour in a van, which was really something, because all the other bands, would travel overnight. And oftentimes they were booking the Lollapalooza tour as if the bands were touring in tour buses. And so, it would be like a 12-hour drive between the venues, and
my gosh.
And the other bands would sleep on the trip, but we would drive, till late in the night and then wake up early in the morning and drive. And
were you guys the only ones doing that?
I think that there were one or two other bands on the tour that were still in.
And then what bands were actually on that? I don't remember that specific.
Oh man, I don't know if I remember. I feel like that year was Prodigy, Snoop Dogg, Tool, James were bands playing the main stage. We were on the second stage, so keeping it real.
Do you have any of the bands that you saw during that time? Do you have any interesting stories or funny stories that you can tell our audience about that? Is there anything that we would be surprised to know? Like, is Snoop a vegan, or, is there anything along those lines that you think would be interesting?
So it was always just sort of minor things. It would be like, I don't know, we're playing, and you kind of look out and there's like John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin just standing there watching the show, standing next to, the guitarist from Tool. And it's like, oh my God, these people are watching us play. I mean, it's not outrageous, and we weren't, again, we were so busy trying to keep up with the tour that it wasn't really like we were spending a lot of time backstage, overdoing it.
That's cool. That's super cool. That's super cool. And then you're from Seekonk, Massachusetts, right?
Well, I grew up in Connecticut.
Okay.
And then moved to Boston, and my formative years were spent there. And then about, I don't know, around 2000, I moved to Providence because I could afford to buy a house, which was something I couldn't really afford to do in Boston.
Sure.
And then moved. Oh, just so Seekonk is basically it is a suburb of Providence. It's just over the line into Massachusetts.
Right.
And so I lived there for a while. Yeah,
that's cool because I actually went to high school in Providence, and Seekonk was my old stomping grounds, and it's where we used to go to the movie theater there, 1,000 years ago. So when I saw that on your bio, I was like, oh my God, it's very rare that I talk to somebody. Well, first of all, it's very rare I talk to a former rock star. And it's also very rare that I talk to someone who's from back where I'm from. So that's cool. So tell us about what was, one of the questions I always ask people when they're on the show is, what was high school like for you? Because I really feel like high school is such a formative experience for all of us. And some people absolutely hate it, and some people love it, and some people kind of fall in between. And so I always like to ask people, what was high school like for Jeff?
You gotta go there, do you?
Yeah.
All right. Let's go there. I did not enjoy high school. There were a lot of perfectly wonderful people there, but I grew up in one of the suburbs of Hartford, and it, pretty conservative politically town. It was the Reagan era at the time. And I don't know, I as a creative person, as a sort of semi hippie parental lineage, it was nice to be in a place that had such beautiful landscaping, and especially as I've traveled around the country and the world since then, I've really come to appreciate Connecticut's really beautiful.
Yeah.
But it just felt really kind of sheltered and sort of provincial mindset. I mean, it's sort of, it's in this kind of nether zone between New York City and Boston, and people who are kind of wanting to make it tend to move to those places, as I did. I tell people we had a class in high school that was the first period of every day was a class called Current Issues. And it was talking about the issues of the day. And there were a group of students coaxed on by one of the teachers there, who every time they would mention Ronald Reagan's name, they would break into applause. And I just found myself thinking, what the hell am I doing here? And so I ended up managing to get into, they just opened a performing arts school in Hartford. And it was like a part-time thing. Like you went to your high school in the morning and then went to performing, it was like Fame.
Wow.
And so I went there in the afternoon for I think my junior and senior year, and actually got to interact with people from Hartford with a wider variety of perspectives and ethnicities and backgrounds, and felt much more comfortable with that.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. And so then you were a rock star for a while, and then tell us a little bit about the transition from being a rock star into being a tech CEO and what you're doing now. How did that occur? And what was the sort of aha moment that you had that said hey, I want to do this instead?
Well, I'd always really been interested in technology, and we had one of the first computer, PC computers, desktop computers, back in the 80s, and I really enjoyed messing around with that. I remember in like junior high school, I had a friend who was particularly technically oriented as well. And like the school, this was, let's see, junior high school, 1982, something like that. We got like the first computers in the school were coming in, and the teachers were scared of them. And so we kind of became like, we would explain to the teachers what to do when it crashed and things like that. They were afraid to, it would sit there with the crash screen up for 3 days because they were afraid to turn it off and turn it back up. And so, I kind of did that all along when I moved to Boston to play music and to go to music school. And I found that if I did like computer temp work, I could actually make pretty good money, $15 an hour, if I learned doing PageMaker. So I, worked at a company called Mac Temps at the time, doing temp work on Macs, aptly named. And I realized that if I learned, the application is now called Illustrator. If I learned that skill, I could get, $20 an hour paying jobs. And so I ended up getting a temp job at a book publishing company called O'Reilly. They're now called O'Reilly Media in Cambridge. And I was doing technical illustrations for their books, but they were really well respected tech book publisher and published books about, the internet protocol, like the little ones and zeros, how to kind of, make computers talk to each other and stuff like that. And I think it was about 92, the people from CERN in Switzerland who were developing the HTTP protocol, which we recognize from being at the front of all the URLs when we visit websites, came to Cambridge to talk to the O'Reilly folks about writing some books about this, because they thought this World Wide Web thing that they were putting together was really exciting. But it wasn't going to get popular if people didn't know how to use it. So they needed some documentation and stuff like that. And the people at O'Reilly said, well, this is great. We're so excited about this that we will, not only will we write books about it, but we want to create an online magazine. And we want to create the first online magazine. And so I became a part of a team there that developed what became the first commercial website, the first website to have ads on it.
Wow.
And website called the Global Network Navigator, GNN.com, and eventually sold to AOL and sort of morphed into various things. I don't even know what's there these days. But yeah, and then I got really excited and actually started one of the first web development companies, and was doing that as I was starting up this new band. And so I had a lot of meetings with companies explaining to them why the web was a better solution than CompuServe or AOL or, we went with Prodigy and that went out of business. And so, our CompuServe site is still up, but this web thing, why should we go with the web?
And, what's interesting about that?
Happy with the record deal. It was nice to just do something where I just could kind of know what I was doing.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say, what's interesting about that is, I've seen, not the stereotype, but it seems like most rock stars are, probably not tech guys as well. And you sound like you had sort of two totally different paths that were sort of feeding your soul and that you really enjoyed, and you were able to do them at the same time. And that's really one of the things that's most interesting, I think, about your story is that, when you're, first you're in tech, then you go into music, and then you go from music back into tech. It seems like you've always really sort of followed your, what you want to do and what your why was, which I think is very difficult for people. I think a lot of people get stuck in their jobs and they get stuck in whatever they're doing, and, they really can't follow what they're doing. And it sounds like not only did you follow it, but you also made money doing it. So can you talk a little bit about what your actual why is and why you do what you do now and what inspires you?
Oh, wow.
I know, big question, right? It's
Yeah.
like serious
I
business.
don't know.
It's 8 o'clock in
Let
the
me,
morning here, so I'm
let me
like,
see if I can
we're
sort
gonna
of
get deep.
yeah, if I can triangulate this. I have always wanted to be an inventor. When I was a little kid, that was what I wanted to be. I wanted to invent things. I, just really got excited about that idea of coming up with creative ideas and assembling things to solve things for people. And I think that that's been kind of the constant thread. That's been kind of the why for me. And I think that there is a lot of overlap between technical thinking and musician thinking. It's a lot of finding patterns and arranging things oftentimes meticulously
Right.
to make them harmonize and all work together in a way, to create a system that all works together. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that, it's interesting because I've actually been putting together a band recently.
Oh, cool.
And it's I need to kind of tell people. I sort of have this caveat when I start talking to people about like, oh, I'm a musician. They say, oh, let's get together and jam. And I say, oh no, I don't really jam. I don't
I don't jam,
really
sorry.
know how to play all of those songs, the standard songs that musicians seem to sit down and play on the acoustic guitar. I just want to create new music. I want to, put together my own stuff. And I actually kind of enjoy not really knowing, coming at it from this sort of virtuoso perspective, sort of stumbling on the sort of naive solutions to things. And to some extent, I think I've run business the same way. And even this stuff in high school, like I wanted to not go by the book, whatever the book was, sort of the conventional way of being. I wanted to kind of figure out my own route through life. And man, I ate a whole lot of ramen noodles,
Sure.
like there were times, even that whole stint of being signed to A&M Records and touring the country and putting out albums and all that kind of stuff. Like, never really, I never really sat down to think about how much money I was making annually.
Right.
But looking at it in retrospect, like, it was a pretty meager living, but it felt like a really big win to be making a living doing that.
Sure. I mean, you're doing something that so many people want to do and are unable to, or you never had the opportunity. So that's interesting. I think the fact that you guys rode in a bus for Lalapalooza, or just in your van instead of a big tour bus, I think that's really funny. And it's really awesome too. I mean, that takes a certain level of foresight to be willing to do that. When they're dangling a tour bus in front of you and saying, "Hey, yeah, hop on the tour bus and
well, yeah, even that was that, like, let's try to figure it out ourselves, I mean, I think, there's sort of a kind of a disrespect for authority that comes with that as well. It's kind of like, you're saying that, but we don't quite see why. It doesn't quite add up to us. Let's see if we can do it our way. And if not, we'll kind of look back, kind of fall back on the conventional methodologies. But it seems like, by trying to forge your own path and figure it out on your own, and allowing yourself to falter, allowing yourself to expecting that you will make mistakes and fail, is part of the process. But you're much more likely to stumble on unique and solutions that not only work for you, but that you feel like you own.
Along those lines, do you feel that was a big part of your success during that time, and actually in your life, is that you're okay being who you are, and you're okay with failure, and you're okay with trying different things and not necessarily following the book and knowing the way to go? I know it's a tough question.
I don't know. I mean, I kind of joke sometimes that like the reason I'm an entrepreneur is because otherwise I'm completely unemployable. So, there's not a great ego that comes along with this. I don't feel like I've figured out the keys to the universe. But I think it's maybe perhaps a way of looking at it that there aren't keys to the universe. It's we're all just kind of going through life trying to figure it out, and if we can admit what we don't know and have a conversation about that and try and learn from it, then we can actually truly advance rather than sort of advancing through artifice, through there is an aspect to fake it till you make it, certainly. Sure. But it doesn't feel great when you kind of feel like you're being artificial with the people around you. Right. Yeah. So, it's really, it's been more of an exercise in authenticity than anything.
Huh. That's cool. Along those lines, what do you think are the biggest keys to really having a truly epic life?
My mom had a saying that made its way through the various companies that I've been a part of over the years. Discipline is remembering what you want.
Interesting. I like that.
And I think that there's this process of kind of checking in on a regular basis with what you want, because you could say you want something and start heading out in that direction and get halfway there and realize like, oh, this isn't really what I thought it was going to be. But to keep checking in with that on a regular basis and keep kind of banging that drum, what do you want? What do you want to do? Are you headed in that direction? Are the decisions that you are making moving you towards what you want to do, want to be? And I think that kind of stuff has been, when I think about sort of this idea of an epic life, it's trying to just continue moving in that direction. I live in Rhode Island now, and as a good Rhode Islander, I bought a sailboat over the winter.
You have to, right? If you live in Rhode Island, I mean, it's crazy not to have a sailboat.
And one of the things about sailing and actually pretty much most boating is that you're never really headed in the direction that your goal is.
Right. You have to tack and jibe.
Right. It's a constant process of adjusting. However, if you sit at the dock and think, all right, let's plan this out. Perfect. If I can plan everything out, plan it out. You'll never leave the dock, right? Because the wind will shift and you just got to get out there. You got to get off the dock and head out, and just keep adjusting as you go. Try to check in. Is this where I want to be going?
That's cool. That's super cool. Do you find that advice from your mom has really? I mean, is that something she told you when you were really young, and is that something you've sort of followed most of your life?
I picked it up probably at some point where it made sense to me. Sure. It may be something that she said. I remember from younger her talking about sort of life being for learning, right? That life is a learning process, and that's something I've really taken to heart my whole life. That the meaning of life is learning, and to really master it is a process of learning from your mistakes, learning from other people, just trying to figure things out as you go. But the this discipline is remembering what you want. I think I picked up later on around the time of playing in a band and stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. What do you think? If you could go back in time, because it sounds like you're around my age. I graduated high school in 88.
Yep, 87 I graduated.
Oh, so. Wow. Okay. So you're even older than me. What would you tell the 20-year-old version of yourself? What if you could go back in time and you could see the 20-year-old Jeff, what would you say?
I don't know. It's been really interesting being a parent. I have a son who's 13 years old now. And, I get the opportunities to say those things. As he gets into his teenage years, he wants to listen less, but I want to tell him more. I think that there's just an aspect of it's going to be okay, or it'll all work out, or it'll all come together, because heading out on your own path like that and sort of forging your own way feels like crazy maniacal behavior on a regular basis. I feel, why am I doing this? Why don't I just get a job working for somebody else? Why don't I stop feeling like I have something to share with the universe, and that I need to be driven to do that, Right. But it all has worked out. I built off the band, and I didn't make a whole lot of money with that, but it's really great, and I feel really proud of it.
Sure.
I don't have bitter feelings about it. I know a lot of people who've sort of been through that process end up looking back with some sense of bitterness, and I really, again, I just see it as kind of a learning experience. And when I started Lalapalooza in 2006, there was so much that I was able to bring from being in a band.
Yeah.
I would kind of refer to the sayings that we had being in the band: surround yourself with people who are better than you. Just make great songs, which was one of our mantras. You can really get caught up in all the other stuff. Should we play with this band? We should play with that band. We should get this radio station to play us. We should get that. But it's like, but are you writing good songs? Like, are you actually making good? Is the core of what you're doing up to par? Do you feel proud about it?
Right. It's kind of like that essential thing, right? Like, if you have to keep that stuff in mind, because it's so easy to get caught up in the peripheral stuff. And I totally get it, man. And that it's interesting. You're bringing up just such an interesting point. You're kind of blowing my mind a little bit, because I was in a band in college. And obviously nowhere near your level, because I can't sing, but we were still a band. But I learned so much about myself, and it's really helped me a ton in my career in terms of being able to face my fears and just being able to work with different people. And it actually taught me a lot about loyalty, believe it or not. It taught me a ton about loyalty, because there was one moment in our original band where the guitarist at the time wanted to kick me out of the band, because he was like, and we were in a college band in New York, right? And this is this is one of those, everybody gets a 30-pack of Strohs, they drink it before they play, and they go and play in front of a room of maybe 200 people max, right? And this guy was really serious, and he's like, hey, we got to, his name is kind of funny. His name was Jim. And he said, we need to kick Jim Simcoe out of the band, because he's not really that great of a singer. And then my other friend, who was the drummer, his name was also Jim. So we had 3 Jims in our band.
I was in a band with 3 Jeffs in the band at one point in high school.
Someone says Jim, and then everyone gets up and turns like, what? But so my drummer, who became, who's one of my best friends in the world to this day, he's like, no, Jim and I started this band, meaning Jim Simcoe and I started this band. He's like, we're kicking you out. And so then they ended up kicking the other Jim out, keeping me in, and got another guy in. But you just learn a lot about loyalty and about friendship, and the way to do things, way not to do things. But it's interesting what you're saying is starting with the fact of, hey, write great songs, or hey, discipline is remembering what you're really going after. Those are such key things, I think, in life, because especially in our day and age, where it's so easy to become overwhelmed with the information and, just the constant influx of things coming at you. We've been talking for half an hour. I've probably gotten, I don't even know how to turn the notifications off on my computer, but I've probably gotten 15 of them in like the last, half hour. It's just easy to get caught up in that stuff. So I think it's interesting how you've been able to kind of lead your life in that way by really focusing on what's been important to you. And I think that's an interesting lesson from the band perspective. Is like, let's write good songs first. Everything else will kind of work out after that.
Yeah. I mean, it's so much to learn from playing in a band. Being in a group with people and just group dynamics and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot. I actually did a talk a couple of years ago that I called "Lessons Learned from Rock and Roll." Cool. It's probably a video of it somewhere online, but where I was talking to people that run businesses about what I learned about business from playing in a band. There's a lot. What
were some of the things, along that line? I mean, like, I don't want to go off on a big tangent, but what were some of those things? Like, what were the biggest lessons you learned from being in a band that you apply to life and business?
There was a story that I picked up that ended up being something that I needed to use. I went to Berklee College of Music out of when I graduated high school, and found myself in yet another school that I was uncomfortable at, and so I decided to just take the business classes there. Right. I figured that was going to be the thing that was sort of the most valuable to me. I was not interested in becoming the fastest guitar player on the planet or the most jazz-orific guy, whatever, all that. I was into Velvet Underground and punk rock, and it just seemed like I don't know that I want to know more than 3 chords. Right. And so but I remember a story that one of the teachers was telling about needing to kick your sibling out of the band. That they're just can get to be a point where if it's not working, it's not working. And right. There was a point in Orbit early on where we had a guy in the band and it just wasn't working, and right. it was a 3-piece band. So that's a third of the band isn't working. Now from a personal it's I like this person. I want to, support him. I want to, but I think, but once we cleaned house a little bit and kind of started over, because there's also this fear, we'll never find another bass player. But right. We did. And it was good to do. So there's stuff like that I think I take to business these days I'm hesitant to say sometimes business is business. But ultimately it really has more to do with the dynamics of a group and just trying to sort of balance that.
Right.
I'm trying to think of what else. Another thing actually that I talked about in that talk was just it's really powerful to be in a group of people standing up on a stage, sharing a message, communicating, with a consistent thing. We put this together and we are presenting it. We are sharing it with you, and I think that there are a lot of ways to sort of replicate that in business. I actually sold my shares in Lalapalooza earlier this year, and mm-hmm. I have a new company called Yonder, which people can find at yonder.io. Lalapalooza, in this, I mentioned I prefer to write my own book rather than going by whatever book people seem to be going by. Lalapalooza is a fully distributed company, so it never had an office. Right. We just would hire people, wherever we would find them, and we built the company that way. Really successful company, and now Yonder is a company to help other companies figure out how to do that. Cool. And to support companies that are doing remote work and want to.
It's a cool name too, Yonder. That's a cool name. I'll put it in the show notes. I'll get all your information later on.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's cool.
And so, but I do a podcast, and we try to sort of put ourselves out there as much as possible, writing, and, take kind of putting ourselves out there in front of people. I think it can be really, I don't know, it really brings people together. And it can feel a little bit, nerve-wracking, to feel like, man, I know some about this, but I don't know everything about this. I don't know if I want to stand up and present on this. But chances are, if you know something about a thing, you know more than a lot of other people about that thing.
And I think people just appreciate the courage of you going up there.
Yeah.
I know that when we had our band, which was a very, it's kind of even funny to call it a band. And we had, a guitarist and a bassist and a drummer and me. And we had like basically 2.5 really good musicians and then half of a good musician and then me. And it's one of those things where like, yeah, that's super nerve wracking, dude. Like you go up there and you're playing in front of a bunch of people. And like, I remember the first time we played and I was like, I'm playing in front of all my friends. I go to a super small college. If like we bomb, this is going to be horrible for the next 4 years, because this was my freshman year that we did this. And I remember I have never in my life been as scared as I was that first time on stage. Cause I was like, holy shit. Like I can't get out of this. Like we're on stage. The microphone is here. They're starting to play the music. I have to start singing like soon. I can't. I can't drop it.
I need to start singing soon, and I don't remember what the lyrics are.
Yeah, me too. I was the same thing. I couldn't remember the lyrics. Or my thing. It's kind of funny because I would think of myself. I'm a relatively smart guy. Relatively smart, right? Like I don't know. I mean, I run a business, got a family, seem to be operating life pretty decently. Jesus, I cannot for the life of me know when to come into a song. So like everyone would start playing a song. And our first song, we always used to open with No Sleep Till Brooklyn by the Beastie Boys. And that was our song, which if you play it right from a rock perspective, it's awesome because you can just play it really loud and it's just fantastic. But I could never, in 4 years of having that band, I don't think I came in on that song correct one time. Not once. Couldn't do it. Could never figure it out. But
there's something about that too, right? Like, how do you make it okay? How do you make it okay to falter? How do you set up the group? You can certainly set it up so that the other guys in the band get pissed off. Right. And, now we're talking about like culture, building the culture of a group or of a company as it's come to be for me. Do you create a culture where, there's no room for error, and whenever anybody makes an error, they are, called out on it and maybe even fired, right? James Brown was famous for that, right? He would always say, when he says, I gotcha, what he's saying is, I heard you make a mistake. And he's pointing at one of the guys in the band. I say,
you're out of here.
I got you. You screwed up. You didn't come in on time. You hit the wrong note or whatever. I got you. And, that's that was the culture of that band. The hardest working man in showbiz, because he was a real taskmaster that way. But, it's also, I've tried to kind of set up the culture around me to be like, hey, listen, we all kind of make mistakes. Let's, keep an eye on each other. Let's try to keep it fluid enough so that, if the song kind of takes a new route tonight, let's make it be okay. That works too.
We kind of had that. It's funny you said that about the creating the culture, because I don't think we set out to do that in our situation, but we definitely fit our respective roles. Like there was this other band that played, and forgive me for telling you all these stories, but you're you're a legitimate rock star. So, I don't really have an outlet to tell these things, but there was another band who played, and they would play after us, and they were really serious. And I remember their lead singer, like he's one of these dudes who always wore like he's a white guy and wore a backwards beret. And he would have these lyrics that he had written, and he'd be on stage with the lyrics in his hand on a piece of paper, and he would be reading them as he was singing. And I remember like, they were like technically, I would say, a good band. But my thing with our band, I was always like, look, people are coming here to see us, and they're coming here to dance, and they're coming here to have a good time. So let's show them a good time. So I was like, in my head, I was like, okay, if I can't sing and I never know when to come in, I can stage dive. I can hang from the, the exposed pipes. I can, take my shirt off and throw it into the crowd and just get everyone kind of hyped up. And I was like, that's what we'll do. Like, let's do that. Let's be those guys, because those guys will be more memorable than the dude who's holding lyrics in his hand. And I really found that to be the case. And we ended up becoming a pretty popular band. On our school,
I mean,
played out.
It's a matter of looking at it holistically. It's easy, again, to kind of focus and say, we need to be technically correct and not make any wrong notes when we get up on stage. But I don't know, people are there for entertainment. They're there, there was sort of this whole kind of art schools spawning musicians like David Bowie and Brian Eno and the Talking Heads and Iggy Pop, sort of throughout the 70s, with this kind of perspective of like, let's kind of take a look at this differently. Like, how can we entertain without necessarily, focusing on it particularly from that standpoint of this idea, these preconceived notions about what it means to perform in a band, but that you're supposed to get up and impress people with your technical prowess as the fastest guitar player on the planet, I don't think that, I think that there's actually a certain inauthenticity to that, a certain, show offness to it.
Sure.
That has kind of turned me off, but I can understand why people like it. But, and again, to take that to life or to business, like, this, idea of, well, why do you need to act this way in business or wear a suit or, all of those things, to just kind of question it and see if it's actually, heading you towards your goals.
Yeah, totally. What, I only have one other question for you, but so what was being in a band and, this whole concept of taking your lessons from being in a band and into the world, what would you say, what was the hardest lesson to learn? Was there anything that came up in the band that was just difficult, and became one of your hardest lessons to learn that you could share? And maybe not. You might not. I mean, you could be so evolved that, like, hey,
it's not that none are coming to mind. It's that too many things are coming. I don't know.
It's a tough question.
Yeah, I'd gotten into the band that I was in previous to Orbit, had kind of evolved. We'd met sort of as friends and put together a band without any particular goals around it or even sort of guidelines of like how this, if there was a primary songwriter or whether everything was going to happen as a group. And a lot of the decisions were made without decisions being made. Right. And it ended up sort of evolving in a way that ended up being really uncomfortable for me. I want to say this in a way that respects the other guys in the band if they were to listen to this, but I was probably the most driven person in the band. Okay. This was like I wanted to do this, and the other guys were more I met them through jobs I had or whatever, and said like, hey, you should be in my band. You play guitar, hey, be in my band. Hey, you play drums, be in my band. And so by contrast, I seemed a little bit selfish, overly driven. Egotistical was the word that came to mind there a lot. And I I wasn't really tracking that. I'm the oldest child. And so, I was just sort of used to kind of like things kind of
flowing
my way,
Yeah.
And so, basically at one point I kind of came to the band and said, like, listen, just give me control. I think I got this figured out. I think we can really make it. And unbeknownst to me, the next night they had a meeting and decided to kick me out of the band. Spent too much.
Oh.
And, I was a little bit blindsided by it, but at the same time, it also was this kind of like revelation to me.
Sure.
Like I had been trying to fit into this situation that wasn't working, and these people who were kind of resenting me and trying to just sort of fly under the radar and not really call the resentment or whatever. And getting out of it was so liberating, that really from there on, I really tried to talk about those things in the next band. I remember specifically saying to Paul, the drummer that I started Orbit with, I said, listen, I might be an asshole. The guys in my last band thought I was an asshole. I really don't want to be an asshole. Will you keep an eye on me and let me know if I'm being an asshole? And, it didn't really help that from there on out. But like,
that's great. I mean, there's a certain beauty of being really self-aware as to what you're, kind of who you are.
Being aware of what you're not aware of, even.
Yeah, totally.
And I have tried in the relationship since then, and especially as we started to get involved in the music business and contracts and legal stuff. There's a lot that you. I'm all for sort of organic growth and kind of jump in and just kind of figure it out. But there is some point where you kind of need to say, hey, listen, guys, I seem to be writing most of these songs, so I'm thinking I'm going to take songwriter ownership. If I just want to check with you guys and see if that's okay. It feels like what seems like a good balance to me. This is an awkward conversation to have, but
yeah,
I'm glad I had that conversation then rather than 10 years later,
Sure.
And, and having been through various other sort of legal skirmishes that seem to happen so much around the music business. These days I try to, contracts are simply written agreements, right?
Sure.
They're like, let's write this down and sign it so that we both know what we're agreeing to. And that can be done in other ways.
Sure.
It's really about communication and kind of, and trying to sort of be as above board about things. And ultimately there's a certain vulnerability to it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Well, listen, thank you so much for being on the show. Where can people find you?
Well, let's see. My personal website, where I actually do business coaching also,
cool.
At jjeff.com, jjeff.com, is where that happens. And then Yonder is the company that I'm starting up, and we run a conference for managers and owners of remote companies and remote teams, and we're kind of trying to help sort of push a movement forward in a new way of thinking about work, and kind of empowering more people in that way. And that's all happening at yonder.io. And we've got a podcast there and a newsletter. And if anybody listening is interested or curious about remote work, definitely check that out.
Yeah. I'll put a link to the show notes. Well, thank you so much for being on. It's pretty cool. Like, it's your story is just such an interesting story, and it's just really enjoyable to hear that, and also know kind of like, what you've learned both from being in a band and sort of following your own path, and just the great advice that you got from your mom. Geez, maybe we should have her on the podcast someday. Sounds like she's like my mom. It's just pearls of wisdom left and right.
She had several careers over her life, and ended up actually as a therapist, and got her doctorate, I think, at age 60 a few years back. So
my mom's a therapist too. She's a therapist and social worker. That's so great. Well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you once again, man. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jim. It was a pleasure talking to you.
You got it. And guys, thanks for checking in. And I'll put Jeff's contact information in the show notes where you can reach him. And thanks for listening. Hey, thanks for checking out the show today. For show notes, event updates, and tons of other free stuff, check out epicallday.com. And if you would, I would love it if you were able to leave a review on iTunes, as this really helps other people find our show. Thanks a ton. I appreciate you listening, and I'll talk to you soon.